Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And Phil Spencer today appeared on the kind of funny XCast where he talked a lot about the state of Xbox, its future, their upcoming showcase, among many other topics. It was an absolutely fantastic interview, jam-packed with tidbits of information. Though one thing about Phil Spencer is that if you pay attention to his interviews, a lot of the times he does outline their soonish future without just flat out announcing things. So there were a few things here that really caught my attention, and we're going to talk about that a little later on today. Also, PlayStation, they've been on a little bit of a hot streak here recently, and that continues on today, because not only did they fix a previous issue that they made, but they also preemptively set up one of their premier 2023 titles, and frankly, just one of their most important PlayStation 5 exclusives, period. So, a lot to get into today. As always, do hit those buttons below. It's greatly appreciated. Also, a shout out to my Patreon supporters out there. You all are awesome, and you do help make all of this possible. With that said, though, let's just go and jump right into our first topic of the day, being about a brand new MMO RPG heading over to the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series, and then also the PC. This is Chrono Odyssey, and with its new gameplay trailer, it's getting a lot of attention online for its impressive visuals. I mean, you can see right away from the trailer, the scenery and the foliage that flows in the wind. I mean, it is just a good-looking game for an action MMO RPG of this caliber. I mean, it supposedly has this massive world, the scenery, it looks nice, the character models, they look great as well, and it just screams high quality and attention to detail. You know, this is the hope for these next generation only games after all. I mean, I know some fans have been disappointed with this generation, as you know, at times it does feel like games aren't necessarily fully taking advantage of the power of these consoles, but, and I've said this before, we're only now getting started, and 2023, I do believe, is the year that we're going to start to see more of that shift with less Xbox One and less PlayStation 4 games. And also, we're now getting into those Unreal Engine 5 titles. UE5 is a big upgrade from what we've seen, and in fact, Chrono Odyssey is indeed running on Unreal Engine 5. So, I think just visually, Chrono Odyssey, it looks nice, and admittedly, I think the gameplay looks intriguing as well. I will say, though, that I am, however, always skeptical when it comes to MMOs until I see it in players' hands myself, but at the very least, Chrono Odyssey appears to be a title worth paying attention to. For the time being, though, we still don't have a release date or release window, so as we hear more, of course, I will keep you all updated with all of that. Next up here, though, you Nintendo fans out there have something to be excited as well. I mean, other than Zelda, of course, because that is right around the corner. But Biomutant was also just announced for the Nintendo Switch. This is a creative post-apocalyptic open-world RPG. It released on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC just a few years back. There was actually originally a lot of excitement for this specific title. It didn't necessarily quite meet all of its expectations, as it did have some issues there at launch, but overall, a lot of fans did still end up enjoying it. It does have a very unique setting, and one thing that the Switch does need more of are these open world style of games. Well, that's where Biomutant comes in, as it could be a good option to pick up this holiday when it releases for the Switch on November 30th. I think the only thing right now, though, is that you have to kind of wonder, will this game actually perform well on the Switch? You know, anytime the Switch gets some of these bigger ports, that's really always the main question. How is it going to perform? But one way I kind of look at this is, hey, if that Switch successor does have backwards compatibility, which, I mean, I seriously hope it does, well then, Biomutant only adds to that library immediately. So technically, one way you could look at this is that Biomutant could be a nice option for both generations when that Switch successor eventually comes, so long as it has backwards compatibility. Probably end up coming in 2024 based on what we currently know. Let's go talk about this Phil Spencer interview, though, because I mean, there's a lot to dive into here. Phil Spencer did come on the Kind of Funny XCast today, right after a very rough stretch for Xbox, we'll kind of say here. I mean, the CMA, they just blocked the Activision Blizzard buyout, so there's a lot of questions about that entire situation, on whether or not they can actually still get that through. And then they also just released what some view as one of their worst high-profile first-party games ever, being Redfall. Now, you might not necessarily agree with that. I've seen some people really enjoy Redfall, and I mean, if you are, I'm genuinely happy for you. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. But the fact is, That is the narrative right now. So this interview comes at a very fascinating time for Xbox, and Phil Spencer was very straightforward about that. He time and time again mentioned that they were getting a cranky Phil Spencer in this interview, and quite frankly, that's really the way he came off here. He was very harsh on his own decision-making in specific, and he flat out apologized for the state of Redfall, but that's really not my main takeaway from this interview. What I will say is that I do recommend watching the full video yourself. It was about 40 minutes long, and I think it's a must-watch for any Xbox fan out there curious about the future. So I will leave a link in the description below for you to check out the full video yourself, but I do want to go ahead and go over a few specific topics here. The first of which is about Starfield, which does have some correlation with Redfall. So we talked about this yesterday, that there's a rumor going around that Xbox didn't really have much input on Redfall. Apparently, Xbox leadership saw it after the Bethesda acquisition and didn't really like what they saw, but they, however, chose to take a hands-off approach, and they instead let Bethesda call the shots for that specific game. It does sound like Bethesda and Xbox aren't necessarily fully integrated with every single game that they have in development right now. They do still act as two different publishers with their own group of studios. My theory on that is that Microsoft doesn't want to come in and step on Bethesda's toes, especially with something like Redfall, because this is a game that was in development before the acquisition was made. I mean, you have to kind of understand that if Microsoft came in, acquired Bethesda, and then canceled a game that they previously had no input on, that would have been very upsetting for Bethesda's morale and also the studios under them. And that is something that Phil Spencer kind of alluded to in this interview. But then, and this is what I really want to talk about here, is that he also quickly reassured fans that Starfield is not the same situation. Xbox is actively helping Bethesda with all their resources to make Starfield the best game that they possibly can. So I think that if you're looking forward to Starfield, or if maybe you were concerned about it after the Redfall debacle, I think this is reassuring. And Phil did also note that we will know what frame rate Starfield runs on consoles after the upcoming Xbox showcase. There has been some questions on whether it'll be 30 frames or 60 frames, and we will apparently know after that Xbox showcase this June. That kind of leads me to the next part here, though, and this is where I think things start to get really exciting. Phil did talk about the upcoming showcase, and he did note that we will get updates on some of the previous announced games that we already know about. Now, we don't know exactly which games he's talking about, but the list includes Hellblade 2, Avowed, Fable, State of Decay 3, and then Perfect Dark. So we will absolutely see something on at least one of these games at that upcoming showcase. Now, interestingly enough, though, Phil did later on say this, quote unquote, we've got Forza coming, we've got Starfield coming, Hellblade 2, collections of games coming, good builds of Avowed, I can see it. So he does specifically mention both Hellblade 2 and Avowed. Now again, there's not a 100% guarantee confirmation here that they will be at the showcase, but it does line up with some of the previous rumors that we've heard. Supposedly, both these titles are somewhat close to release, and Xbox did previously have Hellblade 2 in a 2023 Game Pass trailer as well, so I mean, I think that there's at least a good possibility that these games will appear at this June showcase with release dates or a release window. I'd say Hellblade 2 definitely. Avowed, I'd say, is more of a maybe, I think, but Hellblade 2, my confidence only rises that this will be at this June showcase. Now, he did also mention that there will be some surprise unannounced games as well, so do expect a few surprises along the way, and that's where he seemed to be a little bit more happy about Xbox's future. He did go on to say that things are quote-unquote finally coming up to where Xbox has new games planned for every single quarter of the year from apparently a very diverse and creative portfolio. Now, not every one of these games will be for everybody. He did kind of make that apparent, but it seems Xbox's strategy is to be that creative company that has a wide range of games, big and small. So you're going to get some of those small creative games like Pentiment. You're going to get some of those mid-range games like Hi-Fi Rush, which fans absolutely adored. You're also going to get those big titles like Hellblade and then Avowed. So you're going to get a mix of everything here, but it looks like they're trying to go that creative route and really let their individual studios just run with it. Now, I personally like that, and I think that it gives Xbox its own identity. They're not trying to be PlayStation, nor are they trying to be Nintendo. They're just trying to be their own company to make the best and most creative games that they possibly can. So I think so far Phil was saying a lot of great things in this interview, but Now, with that said, there is one thing that I do disagree with him on, and that's where he kind of talked about being the third place console. He made it sound like Xbox just can't catch up with PlayStation, even if they make great game after great game after great game. His wording was that if Starfield is an 11 out of 10 game, PlayStation users are still not going to leave PlayStation. But I kind of feel like that's a poor way of wording this, because I think it's bad for morale. It's just one of those things that as a leader, the head of Xbox, I don't think that you should publicly say that. I mean, I do agree with his overall premise to at least a degree. Brand loyalty is obviously a very strong thing, but I think as long as Xbox can consistently put out great titles, and as long as Xbox Game Pass continues to be the best deal in gaming, they can compete at a more even level, similar to what we saw during the Xbox 360 generation. I think that's what should be their focus, and I think that's how he needs to word things. PlayStation fans might not necessarily sell their PlayStation 5. I mean, it's a great console, but if Xbox has a plethora of must-own titles, it's a console that then can't be ignored, and more fans then might be willing to own both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series. You do have a group of people that might be willing to switch over. You do have a group of people that will buy both platforms. So, I mean, I get what he's saying here, and he might be saying this to earn more brownie points with regulators. We can't rule that out. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't really feel like a good thing to kind of put out there publicly. Either which way, though, my takeaway from this interview is that while Xbox has had a rough recent stretch here in the last month or so, I do think there's a lot to look forward to. I do think that they have a very bright future. I've said that in the past, and I think that will be more clear in the coming months. It, however, is at that point where Xbox needs to show and not necessarily just tell. Words are one thing. Actions are a whole different situation here, and I think that that's what we really need to see with that upcoming showcase and with some of their incoming exclusives. They need to start to prove his words. But yeah, let me know what you all thought about all this in the comments below. Do you agree with some of the things that Phil Spencer said, and are you excited about that upcoming Xbox showcase? It does continue to sound like, yeah, it's going to be quite interesting. Now, we do also have some PlayStation news here to talk about, because the Spider-Man PlayStation 5 Remaster is now being sold as an individual title. I mean, this was always such a weird decision from Sony in the first place, because they were only selling the remaster as a more expensive bundle with Spider-Man Miles Morales, the Ultimate Edition. I mean, on one side, and I think this is kind of why they did it, they wanted to justify that asking price for Miles Morales a little bit more. They wanted that $70 for a smaller scope game. I mean, Miles Morales on its own, it's about 6 hours, but still not selling the remaster separately for those that just want the original title or for those that didn't buy the Ultimate Edition. It was a little baffling at the time. I mean, I've said this before. People discover games at different periods in their life, and even though the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man game was extremely popular, selling tens and tens of millions of copies, there are still people out there that haven't played that game, especially for people who didn't have a PlayStation 4, but now they own a PlayStation 5. There's also those that would like to replay the original Spider-Man, but with those PlayStation 5 enhancements. And then there are those that might not necessarily want Miles Morales, but they want the remaster. So I think no matter how you look at it, an individual remaster would have been a very nice option. Here we are a few years later, though, and they finally opened it up for anybody to pick up as a standalone title. Now, with that said, though, the asking price, I think, is quite high. The Spider-Man Remaster does go for $50 digitally, or you can upgrade your PlayStation 4 game for an additional $10. Truthfully, I think with that, if you don't already own the remaster or the original Spider-Man, the best thing to do here is to just go out and buy a used copy of the PlayStation 4 disc version, because you can get it for like $15 to $20 and then simply upgrade it for an additional $10. So I think that Sony's official asking price here is a little too high. I mean, this is an older game, but what I will say is that I am glad they're at least offering this game as its own individual option now, especially now that you have Spider-Man 2 right around the corner. This is a great way for fans to jump into that sequel ahead of its release. Now, one last thing I want to talk about here is that Capcom is shooting for that 10 million mark when it comes to Street Fighter 6. So they have high expectations here. That 10 million mark is quite the lofty goal. This would make it the best-selling Street Fighter game by a pretty long shot. But, you know, looking at what Street Fighter 5 did last generation, I do actually think that this goal is possible. I mean, Street Fighter 5 reportedly sold 7 million copies, and that game it had a rough launch. Fans were not necessarily thrilled with its launch content. Another thing here is that Street Fighter V was also a PlayStation console exclusive. Even with all that, though, it did still manage to sell 7 million copies. So I think just based on what we've seen with Street Fighter VI so far, it does look like a much more content-complete game. The single player is a huge jump up, and possibly, just one of the better fighting game campaigns, period, so long as it actually delivers on its promise. But I think with all of that in mind, with it being on Xbox as well this time around, that 10 million mark seems at the very least plausible. We'll still have to kind of wait and see if this game is received well when it releases next month. Yeah, that's another big game releasing this June, but it does look quite good from what we've seen so far. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day. They were asked you all, do you think Starfield will deliver and meet its lofty expectations when it releases later this year? And as you can see here, you all seem very split on this one, with 42% of you saying yes, while 49% of you said no. And, okay, so here's the thing about Starfield. I get where a lot of you are coming from, because the expectations for Starfield are kind of through the roof. It almost feels like an impossible goal to an extent. I think Starfield looks good. It is coming from Bethesda, which has a knack of producing some of the most successful Western RPGs of all time. They have Skyrim, they have Oblivion, they have the Fallout series, so they obviously make beloved RPGs. But the expectations for this game are so sky high that it's almost unfair. I think there is a danger of hyping up something too much that then expectations become too unrealistic. I think that's where people need to kind of scale back things a little bit and just hope that it turns out to be a good game. If it turns out to be this game changer for Xbox and Bethesda, it's a generational RPG, then great, that's awesome. But for those that are making this out to be a make it or break it game for Xbox, that might be a little much here. It is an important release, probably Xbox's most important game this generation this far, so it at least needs to be good, and I think that needs to be the focus here. But those sky-high expectations, I do think can be a little dangerous, because then, even if something is good, if Starfield comes out and it's a good RPG and everything, that still might not be enough for some people, because they convince themselves that it's going to be an earth-shattering experience that changes absolutely everything from this point forward. So I think the question really kind of depends on what are the expectations for Starfield. Do you think people need to kind of scale things back? And that's something that I do want to hear in the comments below. Do you think that people need to kind of chill a little bit and just see if this game is good or not? Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.